ever so much for your very concise opening remarks and setting the scene, I think, and I think you covered most of the issues that we'll certainly be wanting to ask you about in terms of this session. And I'll deal with a couple of points that you mentioned in your introductory statement, because I think they're the most relevant and probably the most interesting to the committee, and that is, as you rightly identified, the use of the Section 35 and the further letter that we saw from the Foreign Secretary yesterday issued to the Scottish Government. And firstly, I could tell that you're not just pleased, but really pleased about the outcome of the Court of Session.
Yes.
I wonder, does that encourage you to think possible more uses of Section 35?
No.
No, not at all. No, you wouldn't be tempted now that you've found that this is an instrument that could obviously be utilised in the form of, like if there's legislation you don't like, things you might disagree with, that you feel that you might just reach for that power to...
Well, it's interesting you make the point. It's not an unfettered power, as the judgment made clear. It's been used once in nearly 350 acts that have gone to royal assent. It's alongside the power of Section 33, which is for legislation that's out with competence. In this case, Section 35, which sits in the Act, is for legislation that has adverse effects. It's the first time that the law officers have judged that to be the case, and obviously, as a result, I didn't hesitate to use it. But I think if the Scottish Government make good legislation, listen to the advice of their law officers, don't go out with the competence or don't create adverse effects within the United Kingdom, I see no reason for us to go to court again. But if the boundaries are being pushed, then it is right that the law officers advise my position as Secretary of State to act, and I will always act if that's the case. But I can tell you, as we look out now and the sort of future time frame of legislation that's coming forward, I don't see anything currently in the advice that I've got in front of me that would lead us to returning to court, thank goodness.
Well, that's reassuring, and I think the Scottish Government will be listening very keenly and intently to what you say about the future use of Section 35. And I think Lady Haldane made it entirely and abundantly clear this is a matter for you, isn't it? Entirely your judgment when it comes to certain things. I just wonder, like with the Section 35 on the GRR bill, had you been the Secretary of State under Theresa May's government, would you similarly have evoked Section 35?
Yes.
You definitely would have, even though that was the intention of the UK government. Because you'll remember back in 2019, the manifesto commitments of the programme for government was that the UK government would legislate for the whole of the United Kingdom. You would still use Section 35 about a specific act in the Scottish Parliament when it came to GRR reform there.
Due to the adverse effects of the GB Wide Equalities Act, I would have used Section 35, whoever the Prime Minister was.
Right, so would it make no difference whatsoever if the UK government were intending to legislate in that field in area?
Well, no, I mean, intending to legislate doesn't butter any parsnips. That you have to deal with the law as the law is at the time. Legislation that may be coming may not come, as we know. Not all legislation that's promised happens, as we all know. You deal with the legislation in front of you, and you deal with the law as it exists at the time, and that's why I'd have taken the decision I took in any of those circumstances, because the advice I would have would be this is causing confusion and adverse effect with GB-wide legislation, and that's what it's there for, Section 35. It's very important to understand that it's there to protect devolution. It's there to strengthen devolution. The Scotland Act has it there, voted for by MPs of all parties back in 1998. The SNP MPs voted for it as well. It is there so that when legislation is produced passed by any devolved administration that cuts across legislation on a UK or GB-wide basis, we are then able to stop it. So I think it's a perfectly sensible. And actually, can I just say, because it is Lady Haldane did note that far from being an impermissible intrusion upon the constitutional settlement, Section 35 is an intrinsic part of it, and that's really the point I want to make.